The photograph that changed its history, a miniature. Sarah Chen has spent the better part of her career hunched over dusty archives, her fingers delicately turning the pages of century-old documents and examining faded photographs with the reverence of an archaeologist uncovering ancient treasures. As the head of the Historical Documentation Department at Montreal University, she had seen thousands of images from Montreal's past, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover on that crisp October morning. The photograph arrived in an unmarked envelope, delivered to her office by a nervous-looking elderly man who introduced himself only as Mr. Dubois before hurrying away without leaving contact information. Inside the envelope was a single black and white photograph, remarkably well preserved despite its apparent age, along with a handwritten note that simply read, "Found this in my grandfather's attic. Thought you might find it interesting. A concerned citizen." At first glance, the photograph appeared to be a typical street scene from early. The image showed a bustling intersection, likely somewhere in the downtown core, with horse-drawn carriages sharing the cobblestone streets with what appeared to be some of the city's first automobiles. Men in bowler hats and women in long coats populated the sidewalks, their faces captured in the midst of their daily routines. But as Dr. Chen examined the photograph more closely under her magnifying glass, she began to notice details that made her pulse quicken. The quality of the image was extraordinary for miento moyoch, far superior to what should have been possible with the photographic technology of the time. The clarity was so sharp that she could read the expressions on individual faces, see the intricate details of clothing, and even make out the text on storefront signs with perfect clarity. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself, adjusting her reading glasses and leaning closer to the photograph. The level of detail was comparable to modern high-resolution digital photography. Yet the clothing, architecture, and vehicles clearly placed the image in the early 90s. Chen immediately called her colleague, Professor James Morrison, a specialist in photographic history and technology. Within an hour, Morrison was in her office, his own magnifying glass in hand, examining the mysterious photograph with the intensity of a detective studying evidence at a crime scene. "Sarah, this doesn't make sense," Morrison said, shaking his head in bewilderment. "The photographic plates available in 1908 simply couldn't produce this level of resolution. We're looking at detail that shouldn't be possible for another 50 years, but the technological impossibility was just the beginning of the mystery." As the two historians continued their examination, they began to notice other anomalies that would soon send shockwaves through the academic community and beyond. Discover more. Want to stay updated on this incredible historical mystery? Make sure to enable Location Surface to get notifications when we're investigating mysteries in your area. In the background of the photograph, partially obscured by the crowd, stood a building that neither historian recognized despite their extensive knowledge of Montreal's architectural history. The structure appeared to be a magnificent cathedral or civic building, with Gothic revival features, but its design elements seemed somehow different. The proportions were subtly off, the decorative elements more elaborate than anything they had seen in documented Montreal architecture from that period. "James, look at this building," Dr. Chen said, pointing to the structure with the tip of her pen. "I've studied every major building constructed in Montreal between 1900 and 1910, and I've never seen this one before." Morrison squinted at the image, then pulled out his laptop and began searching through digital archives of Montreal's historical buildings. After 30 minutes of searching, he looked up with a puzzled expression. "It's not here, Sarah. This building doesn't exist in any of our records. But look at the shadows, the perspective, the way it fits into the streetscape. It's definitely part of the original photograph, not something that was added later." As they continued their investigation, more questions arose. The people in the photograph, while dressed appropriately for 1908, seemed to possess a vitality and clarity of expression that was unusual for the formal, posed photographs typical of that era. Their movements appeared natural, candid, as if they were unaware they were being photographed. Yet the technology to capture such spontaneous moments wouldn't be developed for decades. Chen decided to scan the photograph at the highest resolution possible and examine it on her computer screen. What she saw there made her gasp out. In the extreme background of the image, barely visible to the naked eye but clear when magnified digitally, was something that should not have existed. This is getting stranger by the minute, Morrison muttered, leaning over his shoulder to look at the screen. Either this photograph is an incredibly sophisticated fake, or we're looking at something that challenges everything we know about Montreal. The two historians spent the rest of the day examining every inch of the photograph, documenting their findings, and growing more perplexed with each new discovery. As evening approached, they realized they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple historical curiosity. This photograph, if authentic, represented a mystery that could rewrite their understanding of Montreal's past. Word of the mysterious photograph spread quickly through Montreal's tight-knit community of historians and archivists. Within 48 hours of its discovery, Chen's office had become an impromptu command center for what was rapidly becoming the most intriguing historical investigation the city had seen in decades. Marie Bouchard, a specialist in early Canadian photography from the University of Quebec, arrived on the second day with a portable laboratory setup that would allow them to conduct preliminary tests on the photograph without damaging it. Her expertise in photographic analysis had helped solve several historical mysteries over the years, but she had never encountered anything quite like this. The paper stack is definitely consistent with 1908, Dr. Bouchard announced after conducting her initial test. The chemical composition of the photographic emulsion also matches what we would expect from that period. But the image quality... She trailed off, shaking her head in amazement. What about it? Dr. Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. It's impossible, Sarah. The grain structure, the tonal range, the depth of field, this photograph displays technical characteristics that weren't achievable until the development of modern lens systems and film stocks in the 19th. Yet every test I've run confirms that this image was created in the early... As news of the discovery spread beyond academic circles, the photograph began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. Dr. Chen received a phone call from a representative of the Montreal Historical Society, requesting permission to examine the image. More surprisingly, she also heard from a private investigator who claimed to represent interested parties who wished to remain anonymous. The growing attention made Dr. Chen increasingly protective of the photograph. She had it secure in the university's climate-controlled archive and limited access to a small group of trusted researchers. But even as she tried to maintain control over the investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something much larger than a simple historical anomaly. Professor Morrison had been conducting his own research into the mysterious building visible in the background of the photograph. His investigations had led him deep into Montreal's municipal archives, where he spent hours poring over building permits, architectural plans, and city planning documents from the early 1900s. I found something interesting, Morrison announced during their third day of investigation. There are references in the city planning documents to a proposed cathedral that was supposed to be built in the downtown area around 9. The project was apparently quite ambitious, much larger and more elaborate than anything that had been attempted in Montreal before. Dr. Chen looked up from her own research. What happened to it? That's the strange part. The project just disappeared. One day there are detailed architectural plans and budget allocations, and then suddenly all references to it vanish from the official records. It's as if someone deliberately erased all traces of the project. The mystery deepened when Dr. Bouchard made another startling discovery. While examining the photograph under ultraviolet light, she noticed faint markings in the corners that weren't visible under normal lighting conditions. The markings appeared to be some kind of code or notation system, written in what looked like a combination of numbers and symbols. This is definitely not random, Dr. Bouchard said, photographing the UV visible markings with a specialized camera. Someone deliberately placed the markings on the photograph, probably as some kind of identification or cataloging system. What do you think? Share your theories about these mysterious markings in the comments below. Could they be coordinates? A secret code? We want to hear your ideas. Dr. Chen decided to consult with Dr. Robert Steinberg, a cryptographer and professor of mathematics at McGill University. When Steinberg examined the markings, his expression grew increasingly serious. These aren't random symbols, he confirmed after studying the markings for several hours. This appears to be a sophisticated encoding system, possibly based on a mathematical cipher. The complexity suggests it was created by someone with advanced knowledge of cryptography, knowledge that was quite rare. As the investigation continued, the team began to uncover more anomalies in the photograph. A careful examination of the clothing worn by the people in the image revealed subtle details that didn't quite match the fashion standards. The cut of the men's coats was slightly different from documented styles of the period, and some of the women's accessories appeared to incorporate design elements that wouldn't become popular until years later. Even more puzzling was the discovery of what appeared to be a street lamp in the background that didn't match any known designs used in Montreal during that period. The lamp's style was more ornate and technically sophisticated than anything documented in the city's infrastructure records from 9. Dr. Chen found herself working late into the night, cross-referencing every detail in the photograph with historical record. The more she researched, the more convinced she became that they were dealing with something unprecedented. This wasn't just an unusually clear photograph from 98. It was an image that seemed to document a version of Montreal that had never officially existed. The breakthrough came when Morrison discovered a reference to the mysterious building in an Espura memoir, written by a Montreal businessman. The memoir, which had been largely ignored by historians due to its author's reputation for embellishment, contained a passage describing a magnificent cathedral that was built and then mysteriously vanished, as if it had never existed at all. Listen to this, Morrison said, reading from the memoir. The author claims that in 1908 he witnessed the construction of an enormous cathedral in downtown Montreal. He describes it in detail: Gothic revival architecture, elaborate stonework, spires that reach toward the heavens. But then he says that one day, the building simply wasn't there anymore. He claims that when he asked others about it, they looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down his spine. Do you think he was describing the building in our photograph? The description matches perfectly. But here's the really strange part. The author claims that he wasn't the only one who remembered the building. He says there were others, a small group of people who all shared the same impossible memory of a cathedral that had existed and then vanished without a trace. As the team delved deeper into their investigation, they began to realize that the photograph might be evidence of something far more extraordinary than they had initially imagined. The image seemed to document not just a moment in Montreal's past, but a moment in a version of Montreal's past that had somehow been erased from official history. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Dr. Chen received an unexpected visitor. Miss Eleanor Dubois, an elderly woman in her 80s, appeared at her office door on a rainy Thursday morning, clutching a worn leather satchel and wearing an expression of determined resolve. Dr. Chen, I believe you have something that belonged to my family, Miss Dubois said, her voice carrying a slight French accent that spoke of old Montreal heritage. My grandson delivered a photograph to you last week. I think it's time you knew the whole story. Dr. Chen invited Miss Dubois into her office, where the elderly woman carefully opened her satchel and withdrew a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. The sight of these additional materials made Dr. Chen's heart race with anticipation. My grandfather, Henri Dubois, was a photographer in Montreal in the early 1900s, Mrs. Dubois began, settling into the chair across from Dr. Chen's desk. But he wasn't just any photographer. He was part of a secret government project that most people never knew existed. The elderly woman opened the leather journal and showed Dr. Chen pages filled with detailed notes written in French, along with sketches and technical diagrams that appeared to relate to photographic equipment. In 1998, the Canadian government was conducting experiments with advanced photographic technology. Mrs. Dubois continued. They were trying to develop surveillance methods that could be used for national security purposes. My grandfather was recruited because of his expertise with cameras and his discretion. Dr. Chen leaned forward, fascinated. What kind of experiments? They were testing prototype cameras that used experimental lens systems and film stocks that were decades ahead of their time. The technology was based on research that had been acquired from European sources. The goal was to create photographic equipment that could capture images with unprecedented clarity and detail. Miss Dubois turned to a page in the journal that contained a detailed sketch of a camera that looked unlike anything Dr. Chen had seen from that period. The design was sleek and sophisticated, incorporating elements that seemed almost modern in the conception. The photograph you have was taken during one of these experimental sessions. My grandfather was testing the new equipment by documenting street scenes around Montreal. But something went wrong during that particular session. What do you mean something went wrong? Dr. Chen asked. Miss Dubois hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. According to my grandfather's notes, the experimental camera didn't just capture what was there, it captured what had been there, or what might have been there. The technology somehow interacted with temporal elements in ways that the scientists didn't understand. The explanation sounded impossible, but as Dr. Chen looked at the technical diagrams in the journal, she began to see connections to the anomalies they had discovered in the photograph. The advanced image quality, the building that did exist in official records, the subtle anachronisms in clothing and infrastructure, it all began to make a strange kind of sense. Mind-blowing discovery. If this story is giving you chills like it's giving us, smash that like button to show your support for historical mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew. Mrs. Dubois, are you saying that this photograph somehow captured images from multiple time periods simultaneously? Chen asked, hardly believing the words as she spoke them. That's exactly what I'm saying. My grandfather wrote extensively about what he called temporal bleeding. Moments when the experimental camera seemed to capture glimpses of past and future events overlaid onto the present moment. The government was fascinated by the implications, but they were also terrified of what they had created. Mrs. Dubois showed Dr. Chen additional pages from the journal that contained references to other experimental photographs, each one apparently displaying similar anomalies. There were images of Montreal streets that showed buildings from different decades appearing simultaneously. Photographs of people wearing clothing from various time periods standing side by side, and landscapes that seemed to blend different seasons and weather conditions in impossible ways. What happened to the project? Dr. Chen asked. It was shut down abruptly in late May. According to my grandfather's notes, there was an incident. Something went wrong during one of the experiments. The details are vague, but it seems that the temporal effects became too unpredictable and potentially dangerous. All the equipment was confiscated, the research was classified, and everyone involved was sworn to secrecy. Miss Dubois turned to the final pages of the journal, where Henry Dubois had written what appeared to be his final entries about the project. The handwriting was hurried and anxious, suggesting that he had been writing under considerable stress. My grandfather managed to hide a few of the experimental photographs before the government seized everything. He kept them secret for the rest of his life, afraid of what might happen if the authorities discovered that he had retained evidence of the project. The photograph you have is one of those hidden images. Dr. Chen examined the journal entries more closely, noting references to specific locations around Montreal where the experimental photography had taken place. Many of the locations were still recognizable today, though the city had changed dramatically over the past century. Mrs. Dubois, why are you sharing this information now? Why didn't your family reveal this earlier? The elderly woman sighed deep. My grandfather made us promise to keep the secret, but he also said that if the photographs ever surfaced again, we should tell the truth. He believed that someday people would be ready to understand what had happened. With all the advances in science and technology today, perhaps that time has finally come. As Dr. Chen absorbed this extraordinary revelation, she realized that the photograph represented far more than a historical curiosity. If Dubois' story was true, they were looking at evidence of a secret government experiment that had achieved something that modern science still considers impossible, the ability to photograph across time itself. The implications were staggering. If the Canadian government had possessed such technology in 1908, what else might they have accomplished? And more importantly, what had happened to that technology? Had it been destroyed, or was it still hidden away in some classified archive, waiting to be rediscovered? Chen looked at the mysterious photograph with new eyes, seeing not just an image of old Montreal, but a window into a hidden chapter of history that challenged everything she thought she knew about the past. The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.
Chen's discovery of the government connection to the mysterious photograph sent ripples through the academic community and beyond. Within days of Mrs. Dubois's revelation, Chen found herself fielding calls from journalists, government officials, and researchers from around the world, all eager to learn more about the extraordinary claims surrounding the 1908 image. The first official response came from the Canadian National Archives, where Dr. Patricia Williams, the chief archivist, requested an immediate meeting with Dr. Chen and her team. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the archive's secure facility in Ottawa, and Dr. Chen was instructed to bring all materials related to the photograph. This is bigger than we thought, Professor Morrison said, as they prepared for the trip to Ottawa. If the government is getting involved this quickly, it means they know something about this project that we don't. Chen had spent a weekend studying in Dubois' journal in detail, making copies of the most important pages and trying to decode the technical specifications he had recorded about the experimental camera equipment. The more she read, the more convinced she became that the technology described in the journal was far more advanced than anything that should have existed in 1908. The meeting at the National Archives took place in a windowless conference room deep within the building's secure section. Williams was accompanied by two other officials who introduced themselves only by their first names and declined to specify which government departments they represented. Chen, we understand you've come into possession of certain photographic materials that may relate to classified historical research, Dr. Williams began, her tone professional but guarded. We need to examine these materials to determine their authenticity and significance. Dr. Chen presented the photograph and in Les Dubois, taking Les Dubois a learn, watching carefully as the officials examined the materials. She noticed that they seemed particularly interested in the technical diagrams and the coded markings that Dr. Bashar had discovered under ultraviolet light. These markings, one of the unnamed officials said, pointing to the UV visible symbols, where did you first notice them? My colleague discovered them during routine photographic analysis, Dr. Chen replied. We believe they may be some kind of cataloging or identification system. The officials exchanged glances that suggested they recognized the markings. After a brief whispered consultation, Dr. Williams addressed the team again. Dr. Chen, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that has been sealed for over a century. The Canadian government did indeed conduct experimental research into advanced photographic technology in the early 1900s. The project was known internally as Operation Kronos. The revelation confirmed Mrs. Dubois' story, but Dr. Chen sensed that there was much more to learn. What was the purpose of Operation Kronos? She asked.
Initially, the project was designed to develop surveillance technology for national security purposes, Dr. Williams explained. However, the research took an unexpected turn when the experimental equipment began producing results that defied conventional understanding of photography, and indeed, of time itself. One of the unnamed officials opened a briefcase and withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be declassified government documents. The papers were heavily redacted, but enough text remained visible to provide tantalizing glimpses into the scope and ambition of Operation Kronos. The project was based on theoretical work by a European physicist whose research had been acquired through diplomatic channels. The official continued. The scientists had proposed that, under certain conditions, photographic emulsions could be made sensitive to temporal variations in electromagnetic radiation. Subscribe now. This story keeps getting more incredible with each revelation. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on this mind-bending historical mystery. Dr. Chen studied the declassified documents, noting references to temporal displacement events and chronological anomalies that seemed to validate the extraordinary claims about the photograph's origins. The documents also contained budget allocations for equipment that would have been enormously expensive by 1908 standards, suggesting that the government had invested heavily in the project. What happened to the research? Professor Morrison asked. Why was the project terminated? Dr. Williams hesitated before answering. There was an incident in December. During one of the experimental sessions, the equipment apparently produced effects that went far beyond simple photography. According to the reports, there was some kind of temporal disturbance that affected a several block area of downtown Montreal. The officials showed them a heavily redacted incident report that described localized chronological displacement and civilian exposure to temporal anomalies. The language was clinical and bureaucratic, but the implications were extraordinary. Are you saying that the experiment actually affected time itself? Dr. Chen asked, hardly believing what she was hearing. The reports suggest that for a brief period, multiple time periods existed simultaneously in the affected area. Witnesses reported seeing buildings that didn't exist, people dressed in clothing from different eras, and other phenomena that couldn't be explained by conventional science. Dr. Chen thought about the mysterious cathedral visible in the photograph and the subtle anachronisms they had discovered in the image. If the government's account was accurate, the photograph might be documenting the actual moment when past, present, and future had briefly overlapped in downtown Montreal. What happened to the people who witnessed these events? She asked. Most of them were debriefed and sworn to secrecy. The official explanation was that they had experienced hallucinations caused by a gas leak. The few who persisted in their claims were discouraged from speaking publicly about their experiences. The meeting continued for several hours, with the officials revealing carefully selected details about Operation Kronos, while clearly withholding much more information. Chen learned that the experimental equipment had been dismantled and the research materials classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. Dr. Chen, we need to ask for your cooperation in this matter, Dr. Williams said, as the meeting drew to a close. The photograph and journal you discover represent potentially a sensitive national security information. We would prefer that your research be conducted in coordination with government oversight. Dr. Chen felt a chill at the implication. Are you asking us to stop our investigation? We're asking you to be mindful of the implications of your discoveries. This technology, if it could be replicated, would have profound consequences for national security and international stability. We need to ensure that information about Operation Kronos doesn't fall into the wrong hands. As Dr. Chen and her team left the National Archives, they realized that their investigation had evolved from an academic exercise into something with potentially global implications. The photograph wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was evidence of technology that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of time itself. But the government's involvement also raised troubling questions. How much did they really know about Operation Kronos? Was the technology truly lost, or was it still being developed in secret? And most importantly, what other temporal anomalies might be hidden in the classified archives of governments around the world? Following their meeting with government officials, Dr. Chen found herself caught between her scientific curiosity and growing concerns about the implications of her discovery. The photograph had opened the door to a hidden world of temporal experimentation that seemed to stretch far beyond the borders of Canada and the early 20s. The breakthrough came when Dr. Steinberg, the cryptographer who had been analyzing the coded markings on the photograph, made a startling discovery. Working late in his office, he had finally cracked the mathematical cipher hidden in the UV visible symbols. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately," Steinberg said when he called Dr. Chen at home. "The code isn't just a cataloging system, it's coordinates and dates. Multiple coordinates and dates." Dr. Chen rushed to the university, where Steinberg showed her his decoded results. The symbols revealed a series of geographic coordinates corresponding to locations around the world, each pair with specific dates ranging from 1905 years. "Look at this," Steinberg said, pointing to his computer screen where he had plotted the coordinates on a world map. "We have locations in London, Paris, Berlin, St. Petersburg, New York, and at least a dozen other major cities. All of them correspond to dates when similar temporal experiments might have been conducted." The implications were staggering. Operation Kronos hadn't been an isolated Canadian experiment. It appeared to be part of an international network of temporal research that had been conducted secretly across multiple countries. In the early 90s, Chen immediately contacted colleagues at universities in several of the cities identified by the coordinates. What she discovered over the following days painted a picture of a hidden chapter in world history that had been carefully concealed for over a century. Margaret Thornfield at Oxford University was the first to respond with confirmation. "Sarah, this is extraordinary," she said during a video call. "We have references in our archives to a mysterious photographic project that was conducted in London. The official records are sparse, but there are mentions of experimental documentation techniques and temporal photography research. Similar confirmations came from historians in Paris, Berlin, and other cities identified in the coded coordinates. Each location had the traces of mysterious photographic projects conducted during the same time period, all involving experimental equipment techniques that seemed impossibly advanced for their time." Professor Klaus Weber from the University of Berlin provided perhaps the most intriguing information. "We have discovered references to a secret international consortium that was formed in 1900, he explained during another video conference. The consortium apparently brought together scientists, photographers, and government officials from multiple countries to collaborate on temporal research. The consortium, according to Weber's research, had been funded by a combination of government agencies and private investors who were interested in the potential military and intelligence applications of temporal photography. The goal had been to develop technology that could provide strategic advantages by allowing observation of past and future events. But something went wrong, Weber continued. Our records suggest that the experiments became increasingly unstable and unpredictable. There are references to temporal contamination and chronological cascade effects that apparently pose significant risks to both the researchers and the general population. Chen began to piece together a timeline of events that suggested the International Temporal Research Project had reached a crisis point in late 1998, around the same time that Operation Kronos had been terminated in Montreal. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore. Mrs. Dubois provided additional confirmation when Dr. Chen contacted her with questions about her grandfather's international connections. The elderly woman revealed that Henri Dubois had corresponded with photographers and scientists in several European cities and that his journal contained references to colleagues abroad who were working on similar projects. My grandfather wrote about receiving technical specifications and research updates from contacts in London and Berlin, Mrs. Dubois explained. He seemed to be part of a larger network of researchers who were sharing information about their temporal photography experiments. The international scope of the research raised new questions about the photograph's significance. If similar experiments had been conducted around the world, there might be other temporal photographs hidden in archives and private collections, waiting to be discovered. The Chen decided to organize an international conference to bring together researchers who were investigating similar temporal anomalies. The conference, held virtually due to the sensitive nature of the research, included historians, physicists, and archivists from a dozen countries. During the conference, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, from Tokyo University, presented evidence of temporal photography experiments that had been conducted in Japan, and we have discovered photographs that show impossible combinations of seasonal conditions, she explained. Cherry blossoms blooming simultaneously with autumn leaves, snow falling on summer festivals. The images appear to document multiple time periods existing in the same space. Dr. Alessandro Rossi from the University of Rome described similar findings in Italian archives. We have photographs from 1910 that show ancient Roman structures that had been destroyed centuries earlier, appearing alongside modern buildings. The images seem to capture moments when different historical periods briefly overlapped. As the conference continued, a pattern emerged. The temporal photographic experiments had apparently reached their peak between 1917 and 1919, with researchers around the world achieving increasingly dramatic results. But then, suddenly, all the projects had been terminated simultaneously. It appears that something happened, some kind of global event or discovery, that caused all the participating governments to shut down their temporal research programs at the same time. Dr. Chen, observer during the conference's concluding session, Dr. Thornfield from Oxford provided a possible explanation. We found references to what the researchers called the convergence event, apparently a moment in December 1908, when all the temporal experiments around the world somehow synchronized and created a global chronological disturbance. The idea of a worldwide temporal event that had been covered up by multiple governments seemed almost too fantastic to believe, but the evidence was mounting. The photograph from Montreal wasn't just documenting a local anomaly, it was capturing a moment when the entire world had briefly experienced a breakdown in the normal flow of time. As Chen reflected on these revelations, she realized that their investigation had uncovered something far more significant than a single mysterious photograph. They had discovered evidence of humanity's first attempt to manipulate time itself, and the catastrophic consequences that had forced the world's governments to bury the research and pretend it had never happened. But if the technology had existed once, could it be recreated? And were there other temporal artifacts still hidden around the world, waiting to reveal more secrets about humanity's hidden history with time travel? The investigation into what Dr. Thornfield had termed the convergence event led Dr. Chen and her international colleagues into the deepest archives of government and academic institutions around the world. What they discovered painted a picture of a global crisis that had been carefully erased from official history. Chen's breakthrough came when she gained access to previously classified meteorological records from December 9. Weather stations around the world had recorded impossible atmospheric conditions during aquatic. Temperatures had fluctuated wildly, with some locations experiencing all 4 seasons within a single day. Aurora borealis had been observed as far south as Mexico, and magnetic compass readings had become erratic worldwide. Look at this, Chen said to Professor Morrison as they examined the meteorological data. Every weather station that was operating in 1908 recorded anomalous readings during those 2 days. It's as if the entire planet experienced some kind of temporal storm. The meteorological anomalies coincided with the final experimental sessions of the International Temporal Photography Project. According to the decoded coordinates from the Montreal photograph, major experiments had been scheduled in 12 cities around the world. During the same Dr. Weber in Berlin had uncovered the most detailed account of what had happened. In the archives of the German Imperial Observatory, he found a report written by Friedrich Zimmermann, the chief astronomer, describing unprecedented celestial phenomena that had occurred during the December 1909 event. Dr. Zimmermann wrote that the stars appeared to move in the sky. Weber reported during an emergency video conference. He described seeing constellations from different seasons appearing simultaneously, and noted that the moon seemed to phase through multiple cycles within a single night. Even more disturbing were the human accounts that had been buried in medical records from the period. Hospitals in major cities around the world are reported an unusual influx of patients suffering from what doctors had termed temporal displacement syndrome, a condition characterized by vivid memories of events that had never happened and an inability to distinguish between past, present, and future. Dr. Rossi in Rome is found the most chilling account in the personal diary of a Vatican astronomer. The priest wrote that on December 16 years in Tolocho, he observed the city of Rome as it existed in multiple time periods, simultaneously. Rossi explained. He described seeing ancient Roman legions marching through streets lined with both medieval buildings and modern structures that wouldn't be built for decades. The accounts from around the world painted a consistent picture. For approximately 48 hours in December 1928, the normal flow of time had broken down globally, allowing past, present, and future to exist simultaneously. The temporal photography experiments, conducted simultaneously in multiple locations, had apparently created a resonance effect that had destabilized time itself on a planetary scale. Du Bois provided the final piece of the puzzle when she revealed additional pages from her grandfather's journal that she had previously kept secret. These pages, written in Henri Du Bois's increasingly frantic handwriting, describe the final experimental session in Montreal. December 16, 1908. The equipment is responding beyond all expectations. One entry read, "We are capturing images not just from the present moment, but from multiple time streams simultaneously. The photographs show Montreal as it was, as it is, and as it will be. But something is wrong. The temporal boundaries are breaking down." The final entry, dated December 17, 1908, was barely legible. The experiment must be stopped immediately. Time itself is unraveling. We have opened a door that we cannot close. May God forgive us for what we have done. Chen realized that the Montreal photograph wasn't just documenting a local temporal anomaly. It was capturing the moment when humanity's first attempt to manipulate time had spiraled out of control, threatening the very fabric of reality. The international research team began to piece together what had happened next. Faced with a global temporal crisis that threatened to tear apart the timeline itself, the world's governments had apparently coordinated an unprecedented cover-up operation. All evidence of the temporal photographic experiments had been classified or destroyed. Witnesses had been silenced, and the entire event had been erased from official history. It explains why all the projects were terminated simultaneously, Dr. Thornfield observed. They weren't just shutting down individual experiments, they were desperately trying to prevent a complete breakdown of temporal causality. The cover-up had been remarkably successful. For over a century, the convergence event had remained hidden, known only to a small group of government officials and researchers who had been sworn to secrecy. The few witnesses who had tried to speak publicly about their experiences had been discredited or silenced, but the temporal photography technology hadn't been completely destroyed. According to Mrs. Dubois, her grandfather had hidden several pieces of experimental equipment along with the photographs, believing that future generations might need to understand what had happened. If the technology was too dangerous to use, but too important to destroy completely, Mrs. Dubois explained. He believed that someday humanity would develop the wisdom and scientific understanding necessary to safely explore temporal manipulation. As Dr. Chen absorbed these revelations, she realized that their investigation had uncovered one of the most significant cover-ups in human history. The convergence event represented humanity's first encounter with the dangers of temporal manipulation, and the lessons learned from that crisis had apparently shaped government policies on time-related research for over a century. But the discovery also raised troubling questions about the present. If the technology had existed in 19 where governments around the world still conducting temporal research, using the lessons learned from the convergence event to avoid repeating the same mistakes. The photograph from Montreal had opened a window into a hidden chapter of human history, but it had also revealed that the story was far from over. Somewhere in the world, the descendants of the original temporal researchers might still be working to unlock the secrets of time itself. As Dr. Chen's investigation neared its conclusion, she found herself grappling with questions that extended far beyond the scope of academic research. The discovery of the convergence event and the International Temporal Photography Project had revealed a hidden history that challenged fundamental assumptions about human technological development and government secrecy. The final breakthrough came when Miss Dubois revealed the location where her grandfather had hidden the remaining experimental equipment. In a secret chamber beneath the basement of the family's old home in Montreal, Henri Dubois had preserved not only additional temporal photographs, but also pieces of the original camera equipment used in Operation Kronos. Chen and her team, accompanied by government representatives who had maintained their oversight of the investigation, carefully excavated the hidden chamber. What they found there was a treasure trove of temporal artifacts that provided unprecedented insight into early 20th century time manipulation technology. The preserved camera equipment was unlike anything in the historical record. The lenses were crafted from materials that wouldn't be developed until decades later, and the mechanical components showed a level of precision that seemed impossible for now. Most remarkably, the equipment still showed traces of the exotic energy signatures that had enabled temporal photography. This technology is at least 50 years ahead of what should have been possible in now. The question is, where did it really come from? The answer came from additional documents hidden with the equipment. Henri Dubois had kept detailed records of his contacts with the mysterious European scientist, whose research had formed the foundation of the temporal photography project. According to these records, the scientist had claimed that his theoretical work was based on recovered knowledge from an unspecified ancient source. He wrote that the temporal manipulation principles weren't newly discovered. Dr. Chen explained to the assembled team. They were rediscovered. The scientist claimed that advanced civilizations in the distant past had possessed similar technology. This revelation added another layer to the mystery. If temporal manipulation technology had existed in ancient times, what had happened to those civilizations? Had they faced their own version of the convergence event? Were the disasters of 1908 part of a recurring pattern in human history? Dr. Steinberg's analysis of the additional coded markings found on the hidden photographs provided disturbing confirmation of this theory. The mathematical ciphers contained references to previous cycles and temporal recursion events that suggested the 1908 experiments had been part of a larger pattern of temporal manipulation attempts throughout history. The codes reference dates going back thousands of years. Steinberg reported, if these calculations are accurate, there have been at least 7 major temporal manipulation events in recorded history, each one ending in catastrophic failures and subsequent cover-up. The implications were staggering. Humanity might have discovered and lost temporal manipulation technology multiple times throughout history, with each cycle ending in disaster and forcing subsequent generations to start over from scratch. But the most disturbing discovery came when the team found Henri Dubois' final hidden message, a sealed envelope marked for future generations that had been designed to be opened only if the temporal photography equipment was ever rediscovered. Inside the envelope was a letter written in 1952, 44 years after the convergence event. In it, Henri Dubois revealed that the temporal photography project hadn't been completely abandoned. Instead, it had been driven deeper underground, with a secret international organization continuing the research in hidden facilities around the world. The work continues, Dubois had written. They learned from our mistakes, but they did not learn the most important lesson, that some knowledge is too dangerous for humanity to possess. They believe they can control time itself, but they are wrong. Time will always find a way to restore balance, no matter the cost. The letter included references to secret research facilities and the names of organizations that were continuing temporal research into the 1950s. And beyond, some of the names were familiar to Dr. Chen from her research into government black projects and classified scientific programs. As the investigation team processed these final revelations, they realized that the Montreal photograph wasn't just a historical artifact. It was a warning from the past about dangers that might still exist in the present. What happens next? This incredible journey through hidden history has revealed secrets that could change everything we know about time itself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think temporal research is still continuing today? What other secrets might be hidden in government archives around the world? Dr. Chen found herself facing an ethical dilemma that went to the heart of scientific responsibility. The knowledge they had uncovered could revolutionize physics and open new frontiers in human understanding, but it could also lead to catastrophic consequences if misused. The government representatives who had overseen the investigation made their position clear. The temporal photography technology and related research would remain classified indefinitely. The public would be told that the Montreal photograph was an interesting historical curiosity, but the full truth about the convergence event and the International Temporal Research Project would remain secret. Chen, you've made an extraordinary contribution to our understanding of this technology, Dr. Williams from the National Archives explained. But you must understand that this knowledge cannot be released publicly. The risks are simply too great. As Chen prepared her final report on the investigation, she struggled with the decision of how much truth to reveal. The academic in her wanted to publish everything, to share these incredible discoveries with the world. But the responsible scientist in her understood the potential dangers of making temporal manipulation technology widely known. In the end, she chose a middle path. Her published research would focus on the photographic techniques and historical context of the 1950 image, providing valuable insights for historians and archivists, while carefully omitting the most sensitive details about temporal manipulation. But she also made a private decision that would ensure the truth wouldn't be lost forever. Following Henri Dubois's example, she created her own hidden archive, carefully documenting everything they had discovered and sealing it away for future generations who might be better equipped to handle such dangerous knowledge. The Montreal photograph had started as a simple historical mystery, but it had revealed a hidden world of temporal experimentation that stretched across centuries and continents. The investigation had shown that humanity's relationship with time was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. As Dr. Chen looked at the photograph one final time before it was returned to government custody, she couldn't help but wonder what other temporal artifacts might be hidden around the world, waiting to reveal more secrets about humanity's ongoing struggle to master time itself. The mystery of the Montreal photograph had been solved, but in solving it, Dr. Chen and her team had uncovered evidence of an even greater mystery, one that might still be unfolding in secret laboratories and hidden facilities around the world. The story of humanity's relationship with time was far from over, and the next chapter might already be writing itself in the shadows of the present day. The photograph that had left historians speechless had ultimately revealed that the most incredible stories are often the ones that never make it into the history books. In the hidden archives of governments, in the secret chambers of forgotten houses, the true story of human achievement and failure continues to wait for those brave enough to seek it out. And somewhere in the world, the descendants of the original temporal researchers might still be working to unlock the ultimate secret, the power to step outside of time itself and reshape the very fabric of reality. The question that remained was whether humanity had finally learned the wisdom necessary to wield such power responsibly, or whether the cycle of discovery and catastrophe was destined to repeat itself once again. This incredible journey through hidden history shows us that the most amazing discoveries often come from the most unexpected places, where other secrets might be waiting in old photographs, forgotten archives, and family attics around the world. The past is full of mysteries waiting to be solved, and the next great discovery could be just around the corner.